Today we're testing out full spectrum printing, and then we're going to break it. That's right, we're back on the Snapmaker U1, and today we're checking out full spectrum. This is a fork of the Snapmaker Orca slicer that allows you to leverage the unique advantages a machine like the U1 can offer. So in case you're unfamiliar with full spectrum at this point, we're going to talk about what it is, how it works, and how you use the slicer to set your colors. Along the way, we're going to talk about resolution and how it pertains to achieving sick blended colors. And finally, we're going to cover the strict limitations of full spectrum by mixing colors the wrong way. There's going to be a little bit of testing and messing around, so buckle up here, friends. It's going to get subtly colorful in here. So for the purposes of this video, this is my full spectrum Nacho model. It's the regular Chihuahua model that we print here, but the colorization is a little bit different to suit our testing a little bit better. Some would argue that the colorization on this model looks terrible, but it's for the sake of testing, you'll see. You see, this model's from a dude on Thingiverse named Mustang Dave. I've got no way of getting a hold of him, but I want to buy this model from him. If you or somebody you know knows how to get a hold of Mustang Dave, can you send him my way? So I came across this model when I was effectively looking for a channel mascot back at the beginning of this whole YouTube endeavor. And once I saw it, I knew that I needed to color it like my Chihuahua, Nacho. If I could do that, it'd be a winner. So that's what I did, but the thing about multicolor printing is there's no real good way to blend the edges, the color boundaries. There's just a defined line. And my dog Nacho, he didn't have spots that were super defined like this. They kind of blend it all together. They fade into one another at some points, and they're a different gradient at other points. So when I began seeing these full spectrum videos, I wondered if we could soften up these color boundaries at all using a few different color gradients along the way. And that's what led me to color this abomination in the way that you're seeing. We're using the regular magenta, yellow, white, and blue kind of setup here. It's not blue, it's cyan. I didn't call the pink pink, I called it magenta. Cyan, magenta. I am known for my high level of accuracy after all. So we're using these colors along with the pattern and gradient tools inside of full spectrum to create different shades and see what kind of effect we see in real life. But of course I'm getting ahead of myself. What is full spectrum and how do we use it? So the basic premise of full spectrum, if you're not aware, is using the 3 or 4 colors that you have available to create a lot more colors. And this works by kind of mixing colors, so to speak. And though it's not actually mixing, the way the mix effect is achieved is actually pretty simple. In fact, it's so simple, I imagine there's loads of people out there that are much smarter than me wondering to themselves, why didn't I think to do that? But not me. I'm a simple man. I would not have stumbled upon this personally. Anyway, here's the basic crash course. If I print a layer of blue followed by a layer of yellow and keep that pattern going, I'm gonna get a nice mix of the two. The colors don't actually mix, it's just like an optical illusion that our simple brains can't really reconcile. See, I'm not the only simple one here. Your brain's simple too. You can't even see tiny little different colored layers. So because our eyeballs decide to process this as one color instead of a bunch of little different colored layers, we can effectively achieve a seemingly infinite number of colors. With some limits, of course, we'll get to that. But beyond the alternating colors that cause the illusion, apparently if you mix translucent filament in the same way, the effect is much more convincing. The closest thing I have to translucent filament is this PCTG Pro from 3D Fuel, which is like super PCTG, better than regular PCTG apparently. And I don't want to use that for this, I'm sorry. Check the link below if you want to get some Pro PCTG. One of the few times it's called Pro and it's actually like better and different, not some marketing garbage. So translucent filament can make the effect a little bit more convincing because the opacity of the filament goes a long way to help the layers blend, so to speak. And since I don't have any of that laying around, we're going to focus on regular PLA today. You're not using my PCTG Pro, people. Cool, so this effect sounds great, and technically any multicolor printer can pull this off, but for tool changers especially, this is like a free upgrade. And I'm totally down with that, and we're going to explore that a little bit, but for me, I'm more interested in the limits, like what's stopping us from doing this with every print. We can mix colors and achieve shades outside of the base filament color set, but what are the things that it can't do? Well, there's a few different struggles that I want to dive into and visualize using my terrible Nacho models here. And the first thing that we want to dive into has to do with resolution. And that's going to play a big part in everything that we talk about today, so listen up. So we're going to use the term resolution as a blanket idea here, but there's two factors I want to talk about. The first is layer height. Now the layer height factor is one of the main levers that you can pull to control the color mixing effect. Even when I know I'm not going to be using this shot and I'm like reading my script and stuff, whenever I say mixing, I'm doing air quotes because you're not mixing the colors. If you hear me say mixing, just know I'm over here doing air quotes too. Even before we get into the color mixing stuff, let's just talk about good old-fashioned single color printing real quick. You see, on any 3D print, particularly FDM 3D printing, layer height controls loads of the features on your print. It's the single thing that determines the resolution of all your Z-axis features. And when talking about the X and Y-axis features, they've got a resolution that's much higher. They're much cooler than the Z-axis. The X and Y-axis, they're kind of like that kid in high school that somehow drove a Mustang to school. And when you ask him about it, he just says, oh yeah, I worked a lot and I saved up my money and now I can afford this super expensive car even though I'm only 16. But you see them going out to eat all the time and you know they're awful with their money. So you know that's just not the fact, and you know that their parents actually bought it for them. They just don't want to admit the fact that they were given something super expensive that they didn't have to work for. They don't even have a job. Dang privileged X and Y axis kids. So we can look at these features as the ones that are on the top or bottom of your model, or the features that are in plane with the top and bottom surface, basically. Their resolution is determined by the smallest moves that the tool head can make in those directions, the steps of the motors. That and then the nozzle size determines the smallest features you can make in these planes, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're talking about the Z-axis because the Z-axis is different. And my mom taught me to include people even if they are different. So layer height determines the Z-axis resolution. The smaller the layer height, the more detailed the features are in the Z direction specifically. So we can look at this like the stuff on the walls of your prints, for example. The features that run up and down the height of your model, basically. And since 3D printing is just a bunch of layers stacked on top of one another, the Z-axis is the only one that's affected by the layer height. It didn't have parents that bought it a Mustang. The Z-axis had parents that were gracious enough to lend their car for it to use so it could drive to and from work for a year before it had $8,000 saved up, so the Z-axis would have the privilege to purchase one of his parents' car. And that 2001 Jeep Cherokee was sick, and I wish I never would have gotten rid of it. I'm the Z-axis. This may come as a surprise. Hey, comment your first car below and tell us about how you wish you wouldn't have sold it, and then we can all kind of be like sad or happy together. Anyway, a finer layer height leads to curves being replicated more accurately since the stair-stepping is much finer. But if we're printing with a higher layer height, these features become much rougher. This is how layer height affects the resolution of any printed part, and this is the first ingredient we're talking about when we're considering the term resolution. Now I plan to talk about the other half of the resolution conversation, but before we get to that, let's take a look at the slicer and see exactly how we even use this sucker. After we download it from the GitHub page, this is what we're met with. It's basically the same slicer, but on the side here we can make colors. There's two options for creating colors, gradient and pattern. The gradient option allows you to choose a custom color from a gradient between two colors that you select. So like if you choose a 50-50 ratio between blue and yellow, then you get green. Or you can shift along the gradient between two colors to get whatever shade is available on that spectrum. You get the full spectrum, people. Do you get it? So right off the bat, you get a lot just from this function, but if you're really trying to make some goofy looking prints, the pattern function is the one that you need to look at. This one gives you a lot more control over the color, or in theory, it gives you more control. But we'll get there. The patterning allows you to mix any of the available colors, and this is where I got into trouble on my models. So the way you dial in your shade is by choosing the sequence. So you can type in a 1, 2, 3 pattern to have magenta, blue, and yellow pattern over and over again. If you want more of one color, you just put that into the pattern. So if I was making a pattern color and I wanted it lighter, I would just have whatever the light color is, say 1, be in the pattern more frequently. And again, this makes a lot of sense in theory, but of course it has its limitations. So to understand that and to understand why my full spectrum nachos here look the way that they do, let's talk about the second factor that affects resolution. So if you're trying to print using the full spectrum stuff to blend colors, the finer the layer height, the better the effect takes place. as in if the layer height is too tall or the resolution is too coarse, the effect doesn't really work all that well. It kind of falls apart. Our simple brains manage to pick out the different colors, and the so-called mixing just doesn't happen. So to maintain the higher resolution, this works best when using a super fine layer height. I stuck with a 0.08 millimeter layer height for my testing for the most part, but that's only part of the picture, because we have this other lever that we can pull to adjust the resolution along with layer height. I'm talking about the size of the model. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, increasing the size of your model can really change the way the color blending takes place. So think about it. If I wanted to print one of these Nacho models at 120% size, that same 0.08 layer height is going to resolve these mixed colors a lot better than the standard 100% sized model. Each individual area that is colored is bigger, and each individual feature is bigger. So that means there's more layers needed to create those pieces, which allows for the effect to persist a little bit more. You like that? You like that. So this ties into the layer height limitation, of course, but it also offers a little bit of a solution of sorts. Let's look at the eyes of this full spectrum Nacho model here. Look at the blended color boundaries that I colored and tried to gradually blend in the spots on the sides. These are small features of the model. There isn't a lot of room for the patterns to repeat. There's not much space for the color to be established. Especially if for some reason you were foolish enough to make a very complicated pattern that rarely repeats and has a lot of layers of varying colors. Not that anybody would be so heavy-handed to do that. So since I chose such complicated patterns for some of these colors, there isn't much area for the color to be established really. Depending on the area that the color is occupying and the complexity of the pattern, there may be cases where we're only running through the full pattern like twice. And this is exactly why small features are a limitation in a lot of ways here. But since we have a couple of levers available to us, we're going to increase the resolution and minimize the damage caused by the small feature limit. I printed these Nacho dudes out in different sizes because it helps with visualization of what's going on here. So when you're printing with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, the layer height can only get so small, so we're sticking to a 0.08 millimeter, which is generally referred to as the finest layer height that this size of nozzle can really achieve. You can comment below to tell me what layer height you normally print at. No doubt it's like 2 microns or something, because if I say something in a video, there's always somebody that does it different. And that's what makes the world a great place, everybody. There's people doing things differently, and they make you think differently about stuff that you thought. Boy, this channel got preachy all of a sudden. So since we're not changing the layer height from 0.08, we're going to have to look to the other lever that we can pull to increase the resolution by making the model bigger. And this is what that looks like. Now, since we have an understanding of what we're doing, how we're achieving it, and what things we can do to manipulate this thing, we need to consider the other glaring issues with this system as it stands. Though it is a cool thing that we're doing, and it's a free upgrade, so we love that, everything that we've been considering here has to do with one assumption. These patterns can achieve this blending of the colors as long as it's all happening strictly in the Z-plane. As in, we're going to see this color blending happen on the walls, but we're not going to see it on the top and bottom. So if you've got a lot of simple geometry happening with your part, or if the shapes are smooth and free of like loads of steep stair-stepped layers, this system's probably going to lend itself well to that part. In the case of my Nacho testers, they don't necessarily fit that bill. That's kind of a disaster, obviously. Everything we covered talking about resolution and stuff, it's very visible here. I colored this lighter area on Nacho's head because the real-life Nacho had this white mohawk thing that grew there. And it's important you understand something. We used to call Nacho Cho for short. And so this mohawk was his Chohawk, obviously. Comment Chohawk below to send likes up to Nacho and doggy heaven. But since this feature or the colorization here is strictly on the top of the model, it doesn't really translate very well. So something else to consider is the angle of the layers as well. Like the parts of the model that are fairly straight up and down manage the color blending reasonably well. But once those curves lean over a little bit too far, the previous layers show through a lot more prominently. So we've got an inconsistent coloring condition even though the pattern hasn't changed. And even with that in mind, the same principles remain true to combat these artifacts. If we can increase the resolution enough, the effect is preserved more. And increasing the size will surely help to a degree, but that of course leads us to what you might call the chief drawback of this system. So there's a reason that using a tool changer specifically like the Snapmaker U1 is super preferable when we're doing this kind of process. And I have been able to print some of these things off on my H2C, but the U1 is definitely the one I would choose every time. That's because of the time that it takes to print something using this process. So the Snapmaker U1 does a great job swapping colors super fast because the 4 tool heads are standing by at the ready all the time. No feeding colors from an AMS like an H2C, no waiting around any longer than absolutely necessary for filament changes. Does it sound like Snapmaker sponsoring this video? Well, you know what? They are. Thanks, Snapmaker, for making a machine that's fast and quality, and for sponsoring this channel. Ooh, he's taking sponsor money. That machine must not be good. He's just a shill. Guys, I bought this printer with my money before Snapmaker was even in the picture. It's just a good machine. They happen to be sponsoring this video. Check the link below if you're interested. I fully endorse that printer. So why are we so concerned about these fast swaps anyway? Well, using full spectrum takes way more time than standard multicolor printing, if that wasn't clear. Regular multicolor printing often has color changes mid-layer, but that all depends on your model and how it's colored. Maybe there won't be a color change every layer for the whole part, but now that we're mixing colors, that all's kind of gone out the window. Each mixed color is ensuring a color change on any layer where that blended color is present. So there's going to be a time penalty by nature. But we've also got to consider the fact that the color blending that we're doing is benefited by a super fine layer height. You know what a super fine layer height's great about doing? Adding time to prints. It adds resolution, which we like, of course, but it adds a lot of time. And just think about it, if we use a 0.2 millimeter layer height and complete a print in 1 hour, cutting the layer height in half to a finer 0.1 millimeter will effectively double the printing time for that model. We've got twice as many layers now, so that 1 hour print is now going to take 2 hours. So in the example of a regular multicolor Nacho here on the Snapmaker U1, the standard print takes about 4 hours at a 0.28 layer height, and about 8 hours at a 0.14 like we would expect. But that time's only going to go up because we'll have mixed colors going through the entire height of the Nacho, so there may be color changes where there previously were not color changes. In this case, the model calls for a lot of color changes pretty frequently anyway, so it doesn't apply that much, but this does display the potential weakness or something you should consider when you're doing full spectrum style printing. So looking at these Nacho models, I am happy that I was able to experiment with blending the color boundaries a little bit. It's not something that we can really do without access to loads of different colors, so the idea is really cool. The execution using this model in these circumstances, maybe it's not ideal. Maybe you really have to squint and get far away for the effect to actually take place. Maybe it's operator error. I'll let you determine that. So I'm not sure how often I'm going to be using full spectrum in a practical sense, but it is super cool to know that it's available. I love that it's a free upgrade because free is great when you own bamboo machines that beat up your wallet constantly. Is this something that's just a gimmick? Are there practical applications that I'm not considering? Isn't all of multicolor just a gimmick? Let me know in the comments. Thanks to Snapmaker for sponsoring this video. If you want to get a super fast tool changer that's actually held up way better than I ever expected it would, check my link below, get yourself one of these U1s, you're not going to regret it. Also head to our $2 a month Patreon if you're interested in supporting what we're doing at this channel here. We're trying to go full time with this. If you want to partner with us on that, we would love that. Or you can head to keelprints.com to get a new shirt, hat, or hoodie. Bye.